before we get started, we'll talk a little bit about some basic safety tips. So firstly, when we say we're tying the wrist, we're actually tying the forearm. We're trying to avoid delicate bony things like hands and wrists and stick to more kind of meaty areas like the forearm. And the same with the ankles. We want to avoid the actual ankle bone, and we're tying a little bit higher on the calf. Pen, do you want to talk about ribs a little bit?
Yeah, so when you tie around the chest or around the waist, you want to avoid the floating ribs, which are the last two. You can feel them as they come round, and you'll feel at the front they stop, they don't insert into anything. Those are your last two ribs. You want to avoid putting compression on those. And just generally avoid any joints, always tie above or below a joint.
In general, I'm a lot happier putting force or pressure into quite robust areas like the chest or a thigh or a butt, and less so with something like a throat or something else that's going to be delicate. So we're not going to get into this in a lot of detail today, but I think it's important to talk about the possibility of a nerve injury or of nerve compression. Particularly, there's a very popular tie called the box tie or the TK or the Takate coat. I'm going to mangle that pronunciation, I apologize. But particularly when you're tying this position, which I don't generally teach to beginners because of this nerve compression issue, your nerve running from your shoulder to your hand becomes more exposed, particularly in the lower third towards the elbow. And so you want to avoid putting pressure on the lower part of the arm, but I would also say to use caution when tying this position in general, even if you're not putting pressure in that specific spot, just to be very aware and mindful. Some of the things you can do to check for nerve compression: you can squeeze your partner's hand and ask them to squeeze back. If you notice their grip changing, then you know something is wrong, or if they're not able to squeeze your hand back, you need to untie immediately. You can also ask the person to do a thumbs up. You can also ask them to press against their own back, so like flexing the wrist and pushing against the back. And it's important for bottoms to check as well. So one thing that you might want to do is touch your thumb to each individual finger, and you're looking for areas of selective numbness. So you're looking for numbness just in one finger, just in the thumb, just in the pinky. These are signs of potentially nerve compression, and if you notice it, then generally if you untie right away, you should be all right. If you don't address nerve compression immediately, one injury that you can get potentially is called wrist drop. Pen, do you want to talk about wrist drop a little bit?
Yeah, so wrist drop is a nerve injury caused by the radial nerve, which, as Pretzel mentioned, runs down here and around into the wrist. It's the radial nerve, so you'll get reduced sensation on the top of the hand. Particularly, you might notice it first starting on the thumb and the index finger. You won't be able to lift your thumb up like this, and you won't be able to raise your wrist. There is a difference between circulation and nerve compression, but for the purpose of beginner, just if you're concerned, just untie.
So generally, with circulation, it's numbness of the whole hand, which in itself does not cause an injury. But if you are then unable to check for selective numbness because your whole hand is numb, this can then result in an injury. So I would agree with that and say that if you are a beginner, if you're concerned, you're better off safe than sorry. So one final note about safety: I think it's very important to always have shears on you in case of an emergency. If you get stuck, you need to come out of that tie immediately, something's not coming undone, you can have your shears and you can get out of that situation. In my case, I have emergency shears, and they are angled so that when I'm cutting the rope, I'm not likely to cut the other person's skin while I'm removing them from the rope. Please act slowly and think a little bit before you panic. It's very easy to cut yourself with these shears while you're removing the other person from the rope.